But I felt that, geez, if I was going to go down, at least into professional obscurity, I wanted to at least have the opportunity to say to myself, well, you tried.
I think we've all carved out our niches, and they really don't overlap that much.
He called him greedy and lazy. Not behind closed doors, not in some leaked interview. He tweeted it. Bold, direct, and unmistakably aimed at Bruce Willis. For fans of the Expendables, the fallout was stunning. Two of Hollywood's biggest action icons suddenly at war. But what really happened behind that now infamous $1 million standoff? Was it ego, betrayal, or something deeper neither of them ever said aloud? What began as a power move ended in total silence. But that silence didn't last forever, because years later, when Bruce Willis received a heartbreaking diagnosis, Stallone's tone changed entirely. Gone was the bravado. Gone were the barbs. All that remained was a man mourning a friendship he may have destroyed. And what Stallone said next about regret, about loyalty, and about losing the ability to say goodbye shocked even his closest fans. This isn't just a story of Hollywood rivalry. It's about pride, mistakes, and one brutal sentence that changed everything. Long before the world knew his name, Sylvester Stallone was just a kid fighting battles most people never saw.
And I thought, this is interesting. If I ever pass the baton, I'll pass it on to him because he loves the character.
Born on July 6, 1946, in New York City's notoriously rough Hell's Kitchen neighborhood, his life began with trauma. A botched delivery with forceps left him with a damaged facial nerve, causing permanent paralysis in the lower left side of his face. That's why his speech is slurred, why his lip droops, and why casting agents would later dismiss him as unfit for leading roles. To them, he looked wrong, sounded wrong. He wasn't the clean-cut star Hollywood wanted. But that scar, unwanted and unchosen, became part of his identity. It made him a fighter before he ever put on gloves. As a child, Stallone didn't find comfort in school or family life. His parents, Jackie and Frank, were constantly in conflict, and the home was far from stable. At one point, he was placed in foster care. The trauma was deep, bouncing between homes, watching his parents' marriage fall apart, and never quite knowing what stability felt like. When he finally moved in with his mother in Philadelphia during his teenage years, he brought with him a chip on his shoulder and a storm in his chest. Classmates mocked his voice, his looks, and even his intelligence. One class voted him most likely to end up in the electric chair. It wasn't a joke. It was cruelty masked as humor. But Stallone didn't disappear into bitterness. He used the pain as fuel. He took up bodybuilding not to impress anyone, but to gain control over a body and a life that had always felt out of his hands. He turned to writing and performing, slowly realizing that if the world wouldn't give him a stage, he'd build one himself. He bounced between schools: Notre Dame Academy, Lincoln High School, Charlotte Hall Military Academy, before eventually landing at Miami-Dade College. Then came a brief stint in Switzerland, and finally drama studies at the University of Miami. He didn't graduate at the time, but that didn't matter. His education wasn't about degrees. It was about survival. While scraping by in New York, Stallone took whatever jobs he could, cleaning lion cages at the zoo, ushering at theaters, even scalping tickets to earn a few extra bucks until he was fired. And then came the lowest point. He was broke, homeless, sleeping in a bus station. That's when he took a role in a softcore adult film titled The Party at Kitty and Studs. He was paid $200 for 2 days of work. Years later, he'd explained that he had no other choice. It was either do that movie, he said, or rob someone. But even then, even while doing what most would call rock bottom, Stallone didn't quit. He kept reading. He studied Edgar Allan Poe. He kept writing. And he kept believing deep down that one day he'd create something that would matter. Something raw. Something real. Something that would punch through every rejection and every cruel nickname he'd ever been given. Because behind the voice, the droop, and the baggage was a man who refused to be erased. And when his moment finally came, it would hit Hollywood like a right hook to the jaw.
I tend to make movies that
have a little bit of a contemporary feel, and I just wish, the world was one big passive ball of happiness, but it isn't, so.
Most people beg Hollywood for a shot. Stallone did the opposite. He wrote the role of a lifetime and then refused to let go of it. In 1975, after watching a brutal boxing match between Muhammad Ali and underdog Chuck Wepner, Stallone raced home and started writing. 3 days later, he had the first draft of Rocky. It was raw, emotional, and deeply personal. But when he started shopping the script around, every studio had the same reaction. "We love it. Now let's get someone famous to play the lead." They wanted Robert Redford, Burt Reynolds, James Caan, anyone but Stallone. But he wasn't having it. No matter how broke he wasn't going to sell his story unless he played Rocky Balboa himself. It wasn't ego, it was instinct. Stallone knew this wasn't just a boxing movie, it was his story, a scrappy outsider with nothing to lose. He'd lived it. He wasn't about to let someone else pretend to. For weeks, the offers rolled in, some going as high as $350,000, but Stallone kept saying no. He was still practically homeless, selling his dog to make rent and living off whatever change he could scrape together, but he held his ground. Finally, producers Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff took a chance. They let Stallone star, but only if the film's budget was slashed to the bone. He agreed. The movie was shot fast, on a shoestring budget, with unknowns and borrowed time. And then it hit theaters and exploded. Rocky wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. Critics called it a modern classic. Audiences cried. And at the Oscars, Stallone joined Charlie Chaplin and Orson Welles as only the third person ever nominated for both Best Actor and Best Original Screenplay for the same film. But what most people forget is that Rocky almost never happened. It existed because Stallone had the nerve to say no to a system that kept trying to say no to him. That moment, standing his ground while everything else in his life was falling apart, wasn't just a career decision. It was the first real punch in a fight he'd been waiting his whole life to win. And it changed everything. Because once Stallone proved he wasn't going to be pushed around, he didn't stop swinging. After Rocky, Stallone could have coasted, cashed in, played it safe, but that was never his style. Instead, he doubled down on physicality, on intensity, on pain. In 1982, he introduced John Rambo in First Blood, a tortured war veteran pushed too far by a system that had forgotten him. It wasn't just another action flick. It was a raw nerve of a film, fueled by Stallone's own rage, vulnerability, and discipline. The stunts were real, the injuries were real, and so was the transformation. Rocky made Stallone a star, Rambo made him a force. But behind the muscles and explosions was a body slowly breaking down. Stallone did most of his own stunts, something that earned him street cred, but also left him battered. On the set of Rocky IV, he told Dolph Lundgren to hit him as hard as possible in the chest. Dolph did. Hours later, Stallone was in intensive care with a swollen heart, spending 4 days under constant monitoring. In Escape to Victory, he broke a finger blocking a penalty kick from Pelé. During the Expendables, a fight scene with Steve Austin ended with a broken neck and a metal plate surgically inserted. That's how far Stallone would go for realism. Every fall, every hit, every drop of sweat was real, and it left scars. Still, the 80s and 90s were his reign. Cobra, Cliffhanger, Demolition Man, Tango, and Cash. All box office smashes. But they weren't just mindless action films. Stallone was carefully shaping his own myth. The indestructible underdog who never quits. Off-screen, the rivalry with Arnold Schwarzenegger became part of the appeal. Fans debated who was tougher, who had the better one-liners, who ruled the box office. In reality, the two icons were locked in a decade-long chess match for the crown of action cinema. But Stallone wasn't afraid to break type. In 1997, he starred in Copland, a gritty drama where he played an aging, overweight sheriff. No six-pack, no slow-motion punches. He gained 40 pounds for the role and stood silently next to acting giants like Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel. Critics took notice. Stallone wasn't just an action star anymore. He was a real actor, capable of nuance, restraint, and depth. It was a risk, and it paid off. Still, he never completely left the action world. Even when critics mocked him or box office numbers dipped, Stallone kept building, kept pushing, kept bleeding. Because the empire he was building wasn't about comfort, it was about legacy, and the next move in his career would bring all the legends back together under one explosive roof. By the late 2000s, action films had changed. Superheroes, CGI, and younger stars were taking over, but Stallone had a different vision. One last ride for the old-school tough guys. No capes, no green screens, just grit, muscle, and mayhem. That vision became The Expendables. Written, directed, and led by Stallone himself, the movie was a throwback to everything fans missed. Raw fights, real stunts, and a cast full of legends. Jason Statham, Jet Li, Dolph Lundgren, Mickey Rourke, Terry Crews, Randy Couture, even cameos from Bruce Willis and Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was a who's who of action royalty. And it worked. The 2010 release exploded at the box office, earning over $34 million in its first weekend, the biggest opening of Stallone's entire career. But The Expendables wasn't just a film. It was Stallone's personal statement that the old guard still mattered, that real action didn't need digital effects, and that he could still command a franchise from the director's chair decades after Rocky first ran those Philly steps. He followed it with The Expendables 2 in 2012, adding even more firepower with Chuck Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Critics responded better this time. Fans were thrilled, and the series cemented itself as a celebration of everything the modern action scene had lost. Yet, behind the testosterone-fueled spectacle, cracks were forming. The third film, released in 2014, brought in fresh faces like Wesley Snipes, Antonio Banderas, Mel Gibson, and Harrison Ford. But the magic didn't hold. The box office dipped. Reviews were lukewarm. Hardcore fans didn't love the younger cast. And worse, something behind the scenes was boiling over. A casting decision that should have been routine turned personal. Because when Stallone reached out to bring Bruce Willis back for Expendables 3, what followed wasn't a friendly negotiation. It was a meltdown. A $1 million meltdown that turned a long-time friendship into a very public feud and changed the franchise forever. When Stallone first created The Expendables, one of the biggest wins was getting Bruce Willis on board. As Mr. Church, Willis played a shadowy CIA figure. Slick, dangerous, and unforgettable, even in just a few scenes. Fans were ecstatic. It wasn't just an action movie anymore, it was a cultural reunion. Stallone and Willis, two titans of the genre sharing the screen. Their chemistry was electric, and behind the scenes they were friends, respected each other's work, understood the grind, and shared the kind of career trajectory only a few actors in history had walked. But when it came time for Expendables 3, things took a dark turn. Stallone offered Willis $3 million for 4 days of shooting. Willis said it wasn't enough. He wanted $4 million. Just $1 million more. But to Stallone, it wasn't about the money. It was the principle. He felt insulted, betrayed, and instead of handling it behind the scenes, he went nuclear. On August 6, 2013, Stallone took to Twitter and dropped a grenade. Greedy and lazy. A sure formula for career failure. He didn't name names, but he didn't need to. Everyone knew it was about Willis. The tweet made headlines instantly. Fans were stunned. Hollywood insiders were speechless. Stallone had just burned a bridge publicly, brutally, and without apology. Within days, Bruce was out. Harrison Ford was in. The message was loud and clear. Willis was replaceable. But the fallout went deeper than casting. It wasn't just a business decision. It was personal. Stallone had called out someone he once considered a brother. And Willis? He didn't say a word. No tweet, no interview, no denial, just silence. That silence said everything. The two men never worked together again. Rumors swirled. Some said Willis had grown difficult. Others said Stallone had let ego drive him too far. But whatever the truth was, the damage was done. A friendship that had survived decades of Hollywood chaos had suddenly collapsed over a single $1 million disagreement. And what came next would prove that the wound cut far deeper than either of them had let on. After the tweet, the headlines, and the casting change, things went quiet. Bruce Willis never responded publicly, never clapped back in an interview, never addressed the insult. And Sylvester Stallone? He moved on with a new cast, a new sequel, and the kind of defiance only a man used to fighting uphill battles could pull off. But behind the scenes, that silence wasn't peace. It was distance, cold, uncomfortable distance between two men who once built their careers on loyalty and toughness. Fans noticed the shift. The red carpet photos stopped. The mutual praise vanished. Something had broken, and neither seemed eager to fix it. Stallone, who had once joked about rivalries with Arnold Schwarzenegger and poked fun at critics, suddenly avoided the topic. And it wasn't the first time a close relationship had unraveled on him. Years earlier, he'd fallen out with character actor Joe Spinell during filming on Nighthawks. That friendship never recovered either. In 2012, he lost his son Sage, a tragedy that cracked something deep inside him. That same year, his half-sister passed away. Then came lawsuits, old allegations resurfacing in tabloids, and the kind of unwanted attention that pushes even the strongest public figure into retreat. Stallone was still making movies, still showing up. But something had changed. And when it came to Bruce, even Stallone seemed to carry regret. A year after the tweet, he quietly issued a follow-up. A public apology, admitting they had reconciled. No fanfare, no ego. Just a single tweet meant to make things right. But some wounds don't fully close. Even with the olive branch extended, their friendship never returned to what it once was. They didn't reunite on screen. They didn't share scenes, projects, or even many words after that. Whatever had once connected them, fame, respect, survival, was now just a memory, a quiet, painful one. And then, years later, everything changed again. Not with another tweet, but with a diagnosis so devastating, it made every old fight look small. In March 2022, the world learned the truth. Bruce Willis was stepping away from acting. The reason? Aphasia. A rare and heartbreaking condition that affects language, memory, and understanding. His family made the announcement with grace and pain, revealing that Bruce's ability to speak and comprehend had been slipping. He was effectively losing his voice. Something no action hero, no matter how tough, could fight his way out of. For fans, it was devastating. For Hollywood, it was a shock. But for Sylvester Stallone, it hit somewhere much deeper. Because no matter how rocky their friendship had become, no matter how public the fallout, there had always been history, brotherhood, respect. And now, the one man Stallone once clashed with so fiercely could no longer talk to him at all. In a rare moment of raw honesty, Stallone opened up in an interview. Bruce is going through some really difficult times, and he's been sort of incommunicado. That kills me. It's so sad. There was no bravado in his voice, no snark, just sorrow. He admitted they hadn't spoken recently, not because of bitterness, but because Bruce simply wasn't able to hold those conversations anymore. It was a new kind of silence, heavier than any feud they'd ever had. Stallone began sharing quiet tributes, little moments, small updates, messages of support to Bruce's family. No more jabs, no more public shade, just kindness. He praised Willis's legacy, expressed hope, and made it clear that whatever tension once existed was gone. All that remained was grief. A man watching a friend slowly disappear, not in tabloids, not in headlines, but in real time. And that's when fans realized this wasn't just about two stars making up. It was about one of the toughest men in cinema finally facing something he couldn't fix with a punch, a rewrite, or a paycheck. For the first time in decades, Stallone wasn't battling a rival. He was mourning one, and that pain would stay with him long after the cameras stopped rolling. By 2025, Sylvester Stallone was still working, still building, still chasing something just out of reach. He had returned to television in Tulsa King, played a galactic outlaw in Guardians of the Galaxy, and even started writing books and painting portraits. Quiet, introspective projects from a man who once took punches to the chest just to get a shot right. But something had changed. Not just in his career, but in his tone. In recent interviews, Stallone talks more about family, legacy, forgiveness. He still trains like a soldier, still speaks with that gravelly force, but behind the muscles is a man reckoning with time, with age, with everything he's lost, and what little he has left to protect. His daughters, Sophia, Sistine, and Scarlett, are now grown. His marriage, which nearly ended in 2022, survived the storm. He posts less about projects, more about moments, about reflection. And when Bruce Willis's name comes up, the fire is gone. In its place, stillness, sadness, gratitude. Stallone doesn't try to rewrite history. He doesn't pretend the feud didn't happen. He owns it. Admits his words were harsh. Admits he wishes he'd handled it differently. And yet, in a strange way, that brutal falling out and fragile reconciliation have become part of his story, just like Rocky, Rambo, and all the scar tissue in between. Because Stallone's legacy isn't just about the hits. It's about the hits he took emotionally, physically, publicly, and how he kept standing. How he kept writing, directing, forgiving. He's no longer trying to prove he's the toughest man in the room. He doesn't have to. What matters now is the bond that endured, even after the spotlight dimmed. Stallone and Willis may never share the screen again. They may never finish the conversation that started so many years ago. But what they shared, a fight, a friendship, a final piece, is now written in the kind of ink that doesn't fade with time. And in the end, that's what lasts. Not the box office numbers, not the awards, but the quiet understanding between two aging giants who finally saw each other not as rivals, but as survivors. Of an industry, of a generation, of themselves.